All right. Welcome to the SoDa ASA co-sponsored symposium. I'm happy to see that even more people are trickling in, but I'm using this time to introduce this special SoDa ASA co-sponsored symposium. We are having this co-sponsored symposium in celebration of Privacy Week, and it's a true pleasure for us at the Social Data Science Center here at the University of Maryland that the American Statistical Association, and in particular its section on privacy, or section is probably the wrong word, but Committee on Privacy, has agreed to organize this jointly with us. And for anyone in the audience who's interested in either one of the two organizations, feel free to side text me or reach out afterwards. We'll be most happy to provide additional context. This webinar, as you've seen logging in, will be recorded, and we'll make it available through the SoDa website next week. So if you want to share the love and tell people about it, feel free to mention that. We will have time for questions at the end after both presentations, but as you know, lots of information and questions arise as you hear it. So please use the Q&A feature that we have on the bottom of the Zoom link to write down your question as they come, and we'll monitor it and moderate it and feed it back to the speakers after the presentations. We will also give you the opportunity to ask your questions live. So just indicate that you would like to speak, and we will unmute you during the Q&A sessions. All right. So let me introduce our speakers. Professor Rochelle Tractenberg is local to the DC area. She's a tenured professor at Georgetown University. So glad you could join us. She's author of the book Ethical Reasoning for a Data-Centered World. I couldn't find it in your bookshelf, Rochelle, in the back, but another background item that I do want to feature here, as well as the ethical practices of statistics and data science. Both were recently published in 2022. They feature, among many other things, the ASA ethical guidelines for statistical practices and the ACM code of ethics and professional practice. She contributed to 7 chapters for the 2024 book, Ethics in Statistics, Opportunities and Challenges. And you see where this is going, right? We get the technology from Ivan and the ethics side from Rochelle. Rochelle is currently collaborating on the forthcoming UN Handbook on Ethics in Modern Statistical Organizations. She's also an ASA accredited professional statistician, elected fellow of ASA, AAAS, and the International Statistical Institute. So if you want to check out more from her, go to ethicalreasoning.org and you will learn more about her work.
So thank you for the invitation. I want to take this opportunity to address a question in the Q&A. These slides of mine are annotated and posted and available on my academia.edu page, but I will send the link to the SoDa site and they will host links to the slides if Ivan is able to share his. First point. Second point is this is not going to be philosophical in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to be talking about the role of the statistical practitioner in safeguarding privacy and promoting trust. Originally, I was thinking promoting trust in LLMs, but I don't think people should trust LLMs without verifying. So I'm just going to, there's a note about the title on the slides. So just really quickly, I'm not going to talk about LLMs, and there will literally be no math at all in this talk. There's no theory and no math. You're welcome. But we do need to get some things clarified. So when I talk about statistician, I'm talking about anyone who engages in statistical practice. And according to the American Statistical Association, statistical practice includes designing the collection of data, summarizing data, processing data, analyzing, interpreting, or presenting data, and model or algorithm development and deployment. So all of the activities that Ivan has described by all of the participants in all of those analytic and theoretically model-driven papers, those are all considered statistical practice, according to the American Statistical Association. So a statistical practitioner, for the sake of argument in terms of who owes a duty of care, who has an ethical obligation to follow professional practice standards, anyone who meets the definition of statistical practice is a statistical practitioner. So if you are a fellow of the Association of Computing Machinery and you are using statistical models, you are using statistical practice, and therefore you have an ethical obligation to do so responsibly and respectfully of human rights. So statistical practice and statistical practitioner have these technical terms. And then we come to privacy, which has a much broader sort of expression. And this definition of privacy doesn't include the technical definition of differential privacy. It is the common sense definition of privacy. So if you ask anyone that you know who isn't an academic what they think privacy means, and that's actually a critical assumption throughout my talk, it is the assurance that the confidentiality of and access to information about the entity, the individual, is protected, or freedom from intrusion into the private life or affairs of an individual when that intrusion results from undue or illegal gathering and use of data about that individual. So you can see that Bob's sharing of Alice's marital status is undue use of data about that individual, although Alice didn't say to Bob, hey, don't tell anyone, but I'm getting a divorce. So you have these clear sort of lay representations of privacy, but even when you dig down into what does a layperson understand when they talk about privacy, they may not consider all of the parameters of what is to be kept private. So when you think about personal data, this is according to the General Data Privacy Rule from Europe in 2018. Any information that relates to an identified or identifiable natural person is personal data. So Alice's marital status would qualify under GDPR as personal data. So Alice has the right under GDPR and across the European Union and the Eurozone, I think, to control her own data, including information about her marital status. Whereas more generally, you have data privacy, which would include personal identifiers in data files like where do you live and other specific facts about the individual, versus conversational privacy, which is in Ivan's second half of his talk, he was talking about sort of how do people use language to communicate. We will see that the distinction between data privacy and conversational privacy is disappearing. Specifically, companies are using your data for individualized surveillance pricing, was the topic of a United States Federal Trade Commission lawsuit or report in advance of a lawsuit, specifically protecting consumers against having their data being used, undue use of their data, when they did not actually allow or permit that data to be used. This little red box is a recent example from Meta. In 2024, they announced that Meta AI is collecting data from Facebook and Instagram and using it to train its models. So they offer these services to you for free. The cost that you pay is you have to endure ads. But in exchange for that free service, you are now giving your data and they are training their AIs on it. That was from November 2024. In January 2025, AI announced that it's making all of the platforms across Meta AI utilize your AI engagement chat. So all of the data that you use in conversation with ChatGPT or with others in Facebook is now fair game for Meta to utilize to train its models and also collect and share, sell, however it wants to do that. That is a 2025 use. Some would say undue use of your data. But then you have this released in last week, 16 January. AT&T had evidence it has data about individuals whom the FBI agents are in contact with. These people have a very reasonable right and expectation of both data and conversational privacy because they are sharing potentially dangerous information with FBI agents, and that information was hacked. So you have in the companies using your data for individualized surveillance pricing and AI using your data to train its model so they don't have to pay for data. Those two things are undue, and they may not be transparent to the user. But when people steal your data, it's illegal and also unethical. So these situations, which are current, taken together, suggest that data privacy may not be something that you can reasonably expect ever again, no matter what, because if conversational privacy doesn't have any privilege and the conversation, if it's written down, it becomes data, then all of that data becomes something that someone is going to want to sell. And if someone will buy it, whether that's a company or a government or both, you will be selling your data. So that's the situation. I am sorry to tell you that the world is going towards this no privacy horizon. But given the description of statistics practitioners, which is basically everyone who's involved in deploying AI as well as developing AI, and users of computing in impactful ways, which is how the Association of Computing Machinery describes people who are ethically obliged to use computing in ethical and responsible ways. So statistical practitioners and users of computing in impactful ways have ethical responsibilities. And that does not depend on whether or not you can make money doing unethical things. The ASA ethical guidelines for statistical practice were most recently updated in 2022. The Association of Computing Machinery Code of Ethics and Professional Practice was most recently updated in 2018. And the Mathematics Association of America, possibly in 2025, will hopefully be promulgating guidelines for ethical mathematical practice that are based on 2024 proto-guidelines for ethical mathematical practice. So statistical practice, everyone who uses statistical practices, computing machinery, everyone who uses computing in impactful ways, and everyone who uses mathematics in impactful ways. All three of these technologies, tools, and mental models really fall under some ethical practice standard. And all of them are also required to be consistent with the universal human right of data privacy as declared by the United Nations. So irrespective of your job title, training, career stage, or background, you have ethical obligations to use computing, statistics, data science, and/or mathematics ethically and respectfully of human rights. That's not a philosophical stance. That's actually a professional and practical one. So this is an example. I have 3 quick tables. They're a hot mess if you just are looking at them really quickly, which is what we're going to be doing. But these are the topic of a white paper that I hope to finish in a couple weeks / maybe a month. Looking at 8 core principles of ethical AI. So in 2020, there was a paper published by Field et al., and the reference is in the references of this talk notes and also in the notes for this slide. In that 2020 paper, there were 8 key principles that were synthesized from 36 documents describing ethical AI. And here, this is a table of alignment showing if you are using the 2022 version of the ASA ethical guidelines, which elements of the ethical guidelines speak specifically to which of the core principles of ethical AI. So if you follow the ASA ethical guidelines, as you are charged to do when you engage in statistical practices, you will be following these individual guideline elements to promote privacy and accountability and these other elements. I want to talk about accountability specifically because for professional integrity and integrity of data and methods, ASA ethical guidelines principles A and B, it is your ethical obligation to ensure that if you are making assumptions, those assumptions are met or are at least reasonable. So when we talked, when Yvonne was talking earlier about how assumptions underlying privacy and differential privacy cannot be met or are unreasonable, that's actually your ethical obligation to demonstrate and ensure. So if you cannot do that, it makes it impossible for you to meet the privacy obligation under ethical AI. So following the ethical guidelines for statistical practice may seem like, why would I do that? I'm a mathematician. But in fact, if you're using statistical practice and you follow the ethical guidelines, you would be digging down into this failure to meet an assumption. And hopefully that would either prevent you from making a model and deploying it that can't meet critical assumptions, or it would force you to do something about it, to share the caveats, for example, about that model. This is a similar table for the ACM Code of Ethics from 2018, down the ethical AI principles. And you can see that the ACM Code of Ethics is much smaller than the ASA ethical guidelines, and yet there is plenty of information about complying with ethical use of computing in an impactful way that will help you to address all 8, including privacy, of the specific obligations for ethical AI. And similarly for the proto guidelines for ethical practice of mathematics. So I don't know what they're going to look like when the MAA is done with them, hopefully later this year. But there are 4 sections. And if you look across those 4 sections, you can see that all 8 of the ethical AI principles will be met if you follow the ethical math guidelines. So the upshot is trustworthy AI requires more than just privacy protections. It requires that the people who are conceptualizing models, who are testing models, who are verifying models, who are sourcing data, all of those elements that are required to create and to deploy AI, it requires more than just privacy protections. And given the fact that our data is becoming much more available, whether we want it to or not, it is up to the individual to be and embrace ethical practice, be an ethical practitioner, embrace that ethical practice mindset to promote data security, as well as fairness, transparency, and accountability. These are all features of trustworthy work. These are all featured in the ethical practice standards. And I would argue that you can promise privacy, but if the system appears unbiased or unfair, then it doesn't matter if you promise privacy or even if you can document privacy. People will not trust your system or the work of your system. And more to the point, they won't trust us. They won't trust us with their tax dollars, and they won't trust us with roles, important roles in the public sphere. So the public trust really requires that data security be clearly documented, and it needs to be secure from violations of privacy about our conversations as well as about our personal data. Trust in a commitment to privacy requires accountability. So you can say, look at these ethical AI principles, they are fine. If your organization or you as a practitioner don't show a recognizable commitment to privacy, then no one will believe that you are actually promoting the fundamental human right of data privacy, and that requires some accountability. But public trust requires clear documentation and transparency of what we're doing, but this can actually be extremely challenging to achieve. So Yvonne's talked about the several very challenging issues in differential privacy, implementing differential privacy, given the sorts of data. But I'm talking about documenting transparently what you're doing. This is a quick slide to show that when you are documenting transparency or accountability through audits for bias and fairness, for example, or audits for privacy, if that's what you want to do, you can see there are 7 stages along the statistics and data science pipeline. Each of these stages is important in all of the models that Yvonne mentioned, actually, whether they're explicitly done by AI or machine learning, it doesn't matter. Each of these has to get done. There are ethical guidelines, coverage, or material to help you do each of these tasks ethically. You can't just start at the beginning, specify the needs, make sure you specify needs in an ethical way, and then not consider the ethical implications of any of the other stages. You actually have ethical obligations right along the statistics and data science pipeline. So getting back to the complexity of transparency, this is from the National Institute for Standards and Technologies in the United States, NIST, which is cited on the slide notes. This is just a collection of entities whose data may be involved in the data ecosystem. And all of these individuals has to consider how to manage privacy risk with respect to its own priorities, which means that the layperson needs to understand their priorities, but also in relation to what they can do with other entities' data. So it is complicated. And this is the most, so for Yvonne, the crux of the issue was independence. For me, the crux of the issue is I work in clinical trials as a biostatistician, and we are ethically obliged to ensure that any participant in a clinical trial is informed when they give their consent to participate. So we have an ethical obligation to ensure that they don't just say, sure, I'll be in the study, when there could be some harm to them that they don't fully understand. Problem is that no matter how clearly, no matter what grade level you present the challenge at, no matter how you describe the clinical trial to a potential participant, they still believe that they have greater than 50% chance of having a benefit, even though you've said, we don't know if this will benefit you, and also we're using a placebo that we know won't benefit you, and you have a 50% chance of getting that placebo. So it's very difficult to explain this concrete sense of you may not get any benefit from this clinical trial, yet we call a person who agrees to participate in a clinical trial an informed consenter. So how can consumers be actually informed about potential uses of their data? How can we be transparent when what we're doing with their data is so complex that you need a three-dimensional heat map and multiple equations to explain what you're going to be doing with data or how you're going to be protecting people's privacy? So when you're looking at conversational AI, consumers just may not understand the risks of privacy that you have disclosed. You can meet a minimum standard without being truly transparent. That is 100%. If any one of you has ever read a terms and conditions statement, you can see that that is true. And it was stated that because we cannot achieve clinical trial informed consent, the real ethical importance is to provide some reasonable assurance that the participant has not been deceived or coerced. So when you think about long, unreadable terms and conditions statements that hide gaps in privacy, can you really claim that someone who agrees to that has not been coerced into agreeing just so they can get the product or the app to run? And so you want to consider a reasonable expectation of privacy and what a consumer would consider undue data collection. And you want to protect consumers, for example, your grandparents, by practicing ethically. So this just shows that you can actually meet this obligation at each one of the stages. And to remind you that public trust is a precious resource, and it is dependent on individuals acknowledging and accepting their responsibilities to practice ethically. Each one of you, each one of us on teams, we have an obligation to practice ethically and to encourage ethical practice. So these are the references that are included on the slide deck.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rochelle. I was happy to hear that there's a link to your slides, and because we're redesigning our curricula right now, and I feel like a lot what you presented there probably should go into a regular statistics curriculum.